What I'm proud of is that your focus on democracy and the opportunities that democracy opens up for all of our rights, in my mind, cancels out what Strom Thurmond did to prevent African Americans and others from getting the rights they deserve in this country. So I'm proud of that. But I really want to, you talked earlier this afternoon about the rule of law and the overreach of this administration. And as part of that, you went through a litany of agencies that Congress had established that this president is trying to take away. And I just wanted to point out that, and you mentioned this earlier, one of those agencies that Congress established is the U.S. Agency for International Development. And earlier today, we had a shadow hearing roundtable, the Democrats on the Foreign Relations Committee. It was on the dangerous consequences of funding cuts to U.S. global health programs. And I know that as ranking member on the subcommittee on Africa and global health policy, you would have really been interested in this. I'm glad you were here on the floor, but I wish you could have heard what we heard from the people who testified. We heard from Atul Gawande, who used to be the administrator of USAID, their global health program. We heard from Dan Schwartz, who is the Vice President of Management Sciences for Health, that's a contractor that works on global health programs. And we heard from Nick Enrich, who's the former Assistant Administrator for Global Health at USAID. And they started PEPFAR has saved more than 26 million lives. It's reversed the spread of HIV/AIDS. They've done malaria prevention and control for over 500 million people. They've eradicated smallpox and eliminated most of polio. They've reduced infant mortality by more than 59% since 1990. They've supported cholera, measles, and Ebola outbreak response. And one of the things Dr. Gawande pointed out is that they took the response to Ebola outbreak from 2 weeks. Many of us remember that during the Obama administration when Ebola was coming to the United States. They took that response from 2 weeks down to 24 to 48 hours to be in there to be responding to the Ebola epidemic. And what has this president done? What has Elon Musk and Doge done? They've gone in to USAID. They've cut the global health workforce from over 800 to about 60. They've taken the system that was designed to make programs more efficient, and they dismantled it. And when the Inspector General Paul Martin reported on food rotting in ports, he was fired. USAID has been the largest civilian ground force to address global goals. As Dr. Gawande said, what we learned from USAID is that prevention is a whole lot more efficient and a lot cheaper than emergency treatment. He said that what we spend on global health through USAID has been $9 a household in America in a year. $9. Think about what we've done with that $9. And as they were going through the litany of programs that have been cut, the one that caught my eye was 75% of the pandemic threat comes from diseases jumping from animals to humans. That program has been terminated. 75% of the threat of future pandemics. So, as we think about rule of law and the overreach of this president, would you agree with me that there has been no consultation with Congress about any effort to move USAID into the Department of State, and that because Congress created this agency, Congress has got to be involved in reauthorizing whatever comes next, and that this president and his Doge boys need to understand that before they take any more steps at USAID?
Yes, yes, yes. You and I both know that in a bipartisan way we created some of these programs principally to keep America safe. Many of us remember that dramatic hearing where Trump's Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, sat before the American people when they were discussing the budgets for USAID and the State Department. And John Mattis knew the power of those programs to keep us safe. You mentioned infectious diseases. Well, we live in a world where an infectious disease anywhere is a threat to public health everywhere. So pulling our scientists out of the fight against Ebola, pulling our scientists out of drug-resistant tuberculosis fights, it makes no sense. And then, in terms of our safety, he just simply said, if you cut these programs, buy me more bullets, because our fight's to spread democracy. There are nations in Africa, for example, where the Chinese are trying to influence a different way of life. That's why so many African countries now won't criticize China for things that the rest of the world say are bad because they owe them so much debt, they're so engaged, they're so overplaying the fact. Chris Coons said something, I think it was Chris Coons said something painful earlier about Myanmar. This horrific thing. America, the most generous country on the planet, when there's a crisis, we lead the rest. I've sat in meetings in a bipartisan way with ambassadors from other countries where we had the moral authority to tell them, you're not doing enough. And in the Myanmar crisis right now, as Chris Coons said, who's standing there? Not Americans. We don't have the capacity anymore to help in a horrific crisis like that, but the Chinese government's there. Again, it's what defines us. I keep saying this is not a left-right moment. This is a moral moment, and we tell our truth with what we do with our resources. And here's the thing. When you poll people and ask them how much money you spend on USAID, they say, oh, it must be 10% of the American budget. It must be 5% of the American budget. It's around 1% or less. A penny of what tax dollars you send down to Washington goes to help us to make sure that around the globe we're countering the hard power of some countries with the power of our light and our soft power. We have been the envy of the world, where people see and know how special America is because we live the value of every major religion, that we're going to love our neighbors, we're going to be there for you in your times of need. And we all know, with a terrorist group from far away did the most horrific attack, that in a lot of these countries, terrorist groups are trying to counter the democratic governments there. Look in the Sahel region. Look what's happening. When I was in Nigeria, I was shocked to say what they're talking about, instabilities in the north, the threats of terrorism in the north. I'm going to go for 7 more minutes and stop, but I want to use these last 7 minutes to return one more time to the people of my state and actually other states who demanded we do things different, who asked for help. Before I do, I just want to thank Mike Lee today. He's my partner in antitrust, a specialty of my friend Amy Klobuchar. And I don't know if you got my text, but you got it, where I said to you, I'm kind of going to the floor to hold it for as long as I can. And I may not make our first subcommittee together on antitrust, where we have a lot of common ground. So I'm sorry I missed it today. I know you'll fill me in, but I know my friend filled in. Thank you. So I want to close back where we started, about us, about why I'm here. I believe that there is an urgent crisis in our country that we are not talking about. It's not a left-right crisis, it's a right-wrong crisis. It's a moral moment, and again, in America, that's going to define our character, about who we are and what we stand for. There's a threat to the bedrock commitments we've made to each other as a country. People are threatening that bedrock commitment of Social Security. They're calling it a Ponzi scheme. They're making up absolute lies about it. When I read American after American who said that that is their lifeline, that told stories that if they don't get their Social Security payment or they get caught up because nobody's answering their calls, if the rural Social Security office, I read states, red and blue, where they're closing Social Security offices, if I now have to drive not 100 miles, but 150 miles at 93 years old, it doesn't quite make sense. One of my colleagues stood up here and said, that's already cutting benefits if you can't access the folks. I stood here because there's a threat to these bedrock commitments. The bedrock commitment we've made in healthcare in this country. We won the defense of the Affordable Care Act, but my colleagues know when you start talking about Medicaid, that's not 20 plus million Americans. It's 70, 80, 90 million Americans. It's our elders in nursing homes. It's our children with disabilities. It's our moms giving birth that are still giving birth in the country with about the highest maternal mortality rates in the industrial world. It's a moral moment. Who do we stand for? Like Schumer shocked me when he said they're going to use some kind of budget gimmick to push this through. He shocked me, Chuck. I thought this was going to come down to the parliamentarian, but it doesn't sound like it. Now it's just going to get done. With the math, and I read from Manhattan Institute criticized it on the right. AEI criticized it on the right. They said, what are you doing? What are you doing, America? You're going to rake up trillions and trillions of dollars in debt that our children and our children's children are going to have to pay for, passing the bucks that will grow. Are you doing that to help people get more access to health care, more access to retirement security, more access to the things we believe in, big ideas like universal child care, paid family leave? No, we're doing that in order to renew the tax cuts that I read conservative budget folks, moderate budget folks, all across the spectrum who said it will blow up our deficit. And the benefits of those tax cuts, not all, let's not use hyperbole, but most will go to the richest people in our country who I promise you, I celebrate people who've brought their ingenuity and their expertise and their grit and their tireless work who've built wealth in this country. Should not be us versus them, but I'm telling you that those folks do not need another tax cut. And the corporations who came here, you all remembered, said we would like a 25% rate. The people I read said that when we kicked it to 21, not even what they were asking for from 35, it exploded. One of the main reasons it exploded our debt. And we read from conservative groups who just said all these promises that we would grow our way out of our deficit, they didn't materialize. All the promises that were made. Trump, for those who don't remember or weren't here when I read it, was going around telling folks that, oh, my tariffs, this is 2017, my tariffs, the money that I get, that will be what we could pay down the debt. The math that they did was that would account for about 1/750th of the debt at that time. But he used that money to try to compensate the farmers that he was hurting with his tariffs. This is a moral moment, and people are getting hurt, and people are afraid because of the threats to Medicaid cuts. There were people writing in and said $880 billion would devastate me, but even small cuts to services, my whole family, fragile architecture of our finances, if you just pull out the transportation money that my disabled child uses, that will crumble my financial world. And so when you talk about the bigger cuts, we know the math. Many states who expanded Medicare have a trigger that if it goes below 90%, all the Medicare expansion goes off in that state and millions of Americans will be hurt. That's not right, guys. That's not right. And so this is the choices we have before us. Our veterans and the VA. I'm mad at you now. You made me get very emotional with your story. We read John McCain's story. We read the stories of the poems of the unknown soldier looking over us and saying, what are you doing to the Gold Star families? What are you doing to the veterans? Are you living up to your promises that you made? Well, right now, with the cuts of tens of thousands, over 80,000 veterans who work for the VA, but even more, because about 20% or so of all federal workers are veterans. And we read stories from veterans in America who are shaken by what's happening, who are losing their jobs but yet all they want to do is serve. They're not what they're being called. They're not leeches. They're not criminals. They shouldn't be degraded for wanting to continue to serve their nation. This is what we're talking about, our veterans, our seniors, our health care, our financial security going forward. I ask the question to all those people who voted for Donald Trump, who believed in him that he would lower your grocery prices. I asked you, look at your financial self. Are you better off than you were 72 years ago financially? Well, the answer for most people who believed in him is no, because he didn't set out to do anything to lower prices. He set out to rename the Gulf of Mexico, to threaten Canada, to say I'm going to take over Greenland. He's done a lot of things, 140 executive orders. Many of them actually drive up your costs, make it more expensive to enroll in the ACA, reduce a lot of the tax credits there. He's increased your costs. He's taxed your bedrock services. Stock market tumbles, your 401k accounts are less. Inflation is up. Consumer confidence is down. This is what the voices we brought into this chamber, the voices of our constituents, red states, blue states, the voices of Democrats and Republicans, Republican governors, Democratic governors. We brought all the people that are saying, no, this is a moral moment, not left or right, right or wrong. And so I've tried over the last 25 hours and 1 minute to center the conversation back on what will we do of good conscience. People who are saying, I serve this country, I risked my life, shouldn't be able to keep my job. People who are saying, this country once made itself the envy of the world because we invested in high-quality education for every child. I don't like what's going on at the end of the Department of Education. People who are saying, I worked harder than I ever have, but the prices on everything in my life are getting higher. People who are saying that the America I learned about in school, the one where people's rights are protected, the people are saying that why are we yet again going through another healthcare battle that threatens millions of people, the people are saying that I'm worried about the financial security and the future of my country, the voices of folks. And so I end by saying simply this, where I started was John Lewis. I don't know how to solve this. I don't know how to stop us from going down this road. Chuck Schumer's now told me that they're greasing the skids to do these things. I'm sorry, but I know who does have the power. The people of the United States of America. The power of the people is greater than the people in power. It is time to heed the words of the man I began this whole thing with, John Lewis. I beg folks to take his example of his early days where he made himself determined to show his love for his country at a time the country didn't love him. To love this country so much, to be such a patriot that he endured beatings savagely on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, at lunch counters, on freedom rides. He said he had to do something. He would not normalize a moment like this. He would not just go along with business as usual. He wouldn't know how to solve it. But there's one thing that he would do that I hope we all can do that I think I did a little bit of tonight. He said for us to go out and cause some good trouble, necessary trouble, to redeem the soul of our nation. I want you to redeem the dream. Let's be bold in America, not to mean and degrade Americans, not divide us against each other. Let's be bolder in America with a vision that inspires, with hope that starts with the people of the United States of America. That's how this country started. We, the people. Let's get back to the ideals that others are threatening. Let's get back to our founding documents, that those imperfect geniuses had some very special words at the end of the Declaration of Independence. It was one of the greatest in all of humanity declarations of interdependence. When our founders said we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. We need that now from all Americans. This is a moral moment. It's not left or right, it's right or wrong. Let's get in good trouble. My friend, Madam President, I yield the floor. Madam President, thank you to the pages, thank you to the parliamentarian staff, thank you to the clerks, thank you to the doorkeepers. There are so many people that make this place special. I kept you up all night, kept you up 24 hours. I just want to say thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Madam President. Madam President.
Senator from Idaho.
Madam President, this next regular order of business, confirmation of Mr. Matthew Whitaker